Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. Hallelujah. And peace be with you. And you can say, and also with you. That way we're all on the same page. So, and peace be with you. A couple weeks ago, we honored the memory of Pope Francis. I don't think I did a great job. I started a thought, and I don't think I finished it. I was talking about how, as a church that's not Roman Catholic, the Pope doesn't exercise authority over us in the same way that he does over those churches, which are part of his purview and his jurisdiction. The thought that I don't think I finished was, and even so, he's still an important Christian leader to look to. I don't think I got to that part of my point. I don't think I made that clear. Just because we don't submit to the authority of the Pope the same way that Roman Catholic churches and Eastern Catholic churches do, I have thought of the Pope personally as not just a world leader or representative of Christianity, but as an important theologian and pastor to listen to. I know that you sitting in our church this morning, that you don't agree with everything that comes out of my mouth on Sunday mornings in sermons. That there are things that I'll say or things that I'll share in passing that you'll find yourself saying like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And if you have that relationship with the pastor of the church that you call your church, you can have that relationship with the Pope. Like, it doesn't have to be like, well, he's Catholic and so nothing. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be that way. The Pope can be an important teacher, an important spiritual leader even in the life of any Christian who's open to that. Now, I would never make that a test of faith and say like, well, if you don't think the Pope is cool, then I can't be friends with you, or you're a bad Christian. But there was a lot that Pope Francis offered the church. There was a lot that Pope Benedict XVI offered the church. There certainly was a lot that Pope John Paul II offered the church. And I will confess to, I have several friends who are Roman Catholic, and one of them texted me when I had not been paying attention. Like, I'd been paying attention like kind of broadly and loosely, but like not watching the live stream of the smokestack, you know what I mean, to see what color smoke was coming up. And my friend who's Roman Catholic texted and he goes, we have a Pope. And I said, oh, that's a big deal. And I was driving from, I think, dropping off one of my kids somewhere to here. And when I got here, I turned on the live stream. There was the marching bands in St. Peter's Square. And I found myself excited and nervous about who the next Pope might be. And I just prayed over they already knew who the Pope was. We didn't really know who the Pope was yet. And I just found myself praying, Lord, please let it be a good man. Let it be a good man. Please let this Pope be a good man. Let him be a man of peace. And so when the first words out of Pope Leo XIV's mouth were, peace be with you, I found myself crying in my office. And I do want to say that I was really excited when I heard that he was a Cubs fan. And then I was really disappointed to learn that he's a White Sox fan. And Mike Irwin, who is a White Sox fan, said, it's funny, you'd think after being elected Pope, he'd be a Cardinals fan. That's a groaner, but it's a good one. I look forward to Pope Leo's leadership. And I hope that you will find yourself open to the work that he's going to do in leading the Roman Catholic Church, but also speaking, this is not part of my sermon at all, this is just free today. But there was I'm too online, and there was a lot of chatter from some sectors of Protestantism and evangelicalism, like, this doesn't concern you, this doesn't concern us, this isn't good news, no one should care. And, that, to me, just kind of belies a very large amount of ignorance about just how we got to this point in the church's history. Like until 1517, like you were either Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. There just was no us. And while I do think, I'm a Protestant, and I'm happy about being a Protestant for the most part. But I think to look at other communions of Christians and to be so dismissive and flippant is really harmful to the unity that Jesus prayed for all Christians. And it's a broken unity that we share right now. But the more that we are convinced that the way to that unity is to convince all the other kinds of Christians that they're wrong and they need to become the kind of Christian that we are, we're never going to get there that way. So, anyway. Good Shepherd Sunday is where we find ourselves in the season of Easter. And every year on Good Shepherd Sunday, we read a third of John chapter 10. About somewhere between a third and a fourth of John chapter 10. And on the 3-year cycle of the lectionary, we end up hitting most of John chapter 10 on this Sunday over the course of 3 years. This is the third year in the cycle, and this is the year that is, I think, the hardest for me to preach on Good Shepherd Sunday, because Jesus doesn't, you may have noticed as we were reading the gospel passage, we don't get a lot of the really beautiful imagery about Jesus as the door or Jesus as the good shepherd. And the false shepherds, they climb in the other way, they don't come in by the door. We don't get the language about the good shepherd, the shepherd laying down his life for the sheep. This one, we really just, it's kind of a truncated, right? You do not believe because you are not among my sheep. And my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. It's shorter, and it's harder to preach through. And so for that reason, I'm grateful that this year, Good Shepherd Sunday and Mother's Day fall on the same Sunday. I think it's providential in a way. When we think about shepherds in relationship to the story of the Scriptures, we often think about the Nativity and the announcement of the angels to the shepherds in the fields outside of Bethlehem, and the way that the shepherds go and see this great thing that the angels have made known to them. And if you think about that story through the lens of the pictures that are often given us, whether it's through nativity scenes or art or other representations, you'll know that these shepherds are often depicted as bearded, middle-aged, or older men. And the truth of the matter is that shepherds were actually not often middle-aged or older men. By that point in a man's life, he would have risen up the ranks of the family or the farm to a point where he was farming out that work to younger men. Just think about King David, right? His story starts off, he's the youngest of the sons, and he's off, when the prophet comes into town and he's looking through the sons of Jesse, and Jesse keeps going, nope, 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 nope. He has to ask, aren't there any other kids? Aren't there any other sons? And he's like, well, yeah, David's out there watching the sheep. And if you remember flannel graph Sunday school class, right, you've got David out there, he's killing lions, he's killing bears, he's protecting the sheep. And he was a boy. He was a very young man. Certainly still in adolescence, not 20 yet. So our picture, looks less like, not being able to tell Joseph and the shepherd apart in the little people nativity scene. Which, is this Joseph? Is this a shepherd? Who? And it looks more like the drummer boy, right? The drummer boy who shows up to annoy Mary and wake up the baby. I drummed for her. But even still, if you look through the stories of the scriptures, you'll find that shepherds were not often older or middle-aged men, but they weren't exclusively men either. Rachel, in the Old Testament, who married Jacob, she was described as a shepherd. She's the younger of the two sisters that Jacob marries. The wife of Moses, Zipporah, she's described as a shepherd. When she meets Moses for the first time, it's at a well where she's watering her sheep. And still today, in many cultures, girls serve as shepherds as often as boys do. In fact, maybe more often, because boys are going to go to school, and girls may not. But regardless of their gender, the good shepherd from whom all shepherds learn is Jesus. And what does Jesus say about himself as our shepherd? Throughout John 10, Jesus says that he enters through the door, right? He comes in the right way into the sheepfold. He's not climbing over a wall or climbing over a fence. He's not sneaking his way into the sheepfold. He comes in by the door. He comes in by the proper way. And the church fathers and mothers have understood this to mean that Jesus comes to us as one of us, that he's incarnate. He becomes human in order to shepherd humans. That his intentions are good for us, that he's not trying to trick us or harm us or lead us astray, but that he comes to us as one who is innocent. He says that his sheep know his voice and they follow. Right? The way that he speaks to them. Hello, Aunt. You came in with the peonies, didn't you? Jesus speaks to his sheep often enough that they recognize the sound of his voice. And that when others would speak to lead the sheep astray, those who belong to him recognize that that is not a voice of love and care, and they will not follow those voices. Right? He says that he lays down his life for the sheep, the way that a hired hand wouldn't. That in the face of danger, a hired hand to whom these sheep do not belong, for whom these sheep are not a source of life and livelihood. All creatures great and small, but no ants on the altar. That they'll flee in the face of danger, that they won't stick around to protect the sheep. But Jesus, he will put his life on the line. Whether it's a thief or a predator, that he will not abandon the sheep. One of the most interesting things that Jesus says about himself as the good shepherd is that he has other sheep that are not of this fold, that he must bring also. And that when he brings those other sheep that are not of this fold, that there will then be one flock under one shepherd. This morning in our gospel text, we heard him say, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." My sheep, it's not just that they know the sound of his voice, but that they hear his voice. Right, think about this in the context of the conversation that he's having. The religious leaders of the Jews that Jesus is talking to, he's talking to them at the temple in the colonnade of Solomon, son of David. The true son of David is there for the Feast of Dedication. This is Hanukkah, right, where the Jews celebrate the the returning of the temple to their own control, the cleansing of the temple from the worship of false gods and unclean sacrifices, and the miracle of God's provision that even though there was enough oil for one day, it lasted for 8 so that they could withstand the siege and have their own place, their own faith, their own leadership restored to them. During this time in the winter, the leaders of the Jews come to Jesus, right? It says they gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." Jesus answered them, "I told you. I've already told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness about me, but you do not believe because you are not among my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." We have to be really clear that this is not all of the Jews, right? Because the people who are following Jesus at this point are Jews, that this is specifically the religious leaders whose own power and authority is being threatened by Jesus. Jesus says, "I told you and you do not believe." How has Jesus told them that he's the Christ? Right? He says, "The works that I do in my Father's name, that they bear witness about me." Every sign that Jesus has done in John's gospel to this point, every sign that he's given them, from the wedding at Cana, when the water is turned to wine, to the healing of the man at the pool of Bethsaida, the healing of an official's son, feeding of the 5,000, walking on water. All of these teachings about Jesus being the bread of life and the light of the world, the healing of the blind man, right? There's only one sign left in John's gospel after this point, and that's the raising of Lazarus from the dead. He's done everything except for bring someone back from the dead at this point, and he said, "My sheep hear my voice." What he means is they've been able to rightly understand these signs that he's doing as the work of God. All of these things that I've done, my sheep have understood them. They have heard my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Jesus says, "I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one." The Jews pick up stones to stone Jesus at this point. This is blasphemy. Jesus isn't giving us a detailed theological explanation of how the incarnation works when he says, "I and the Father are one." Of course, in later church tradition, the fathers, the mothers, the teachers, they're going to pick this up and say, he was telling us here. But what Jesus is saying is that everything that I have done has been the work of God. And that's all he has to say that he's the Christ. Christ is God's chosen one, his anointed one, the one that God has picked to show forth God's work. And they want to kill him for it. Right? They don't really want to hear him say this. How long will you keep us in suspense? This is not sincere. They want to catch him. They want to trick him. They want to have words to hold against him. And that's why Jesus doesn't say, yeah, I'm the Christ. He has a witness in his defense, the works that he's done in his Father's name. And the reason that the sheep that God has given to him will never be taken away from him is because they belong to God. And the Father and the Son are one. Jesus is telling us that the strength of the Father is the same strength that he wields. And when we look at the way that Jesus wields that strength, it's not the way the world would wield it. Instead of dividing up resources and keeping people competing against one another to get to those resources, Jesus takes something small and he turns it into enough for 5,000, 20,000 people. Instead of keeping people in the dark, he opens up their eyes, spiritually and physically. Instead of letting a celebration run out of wine, he takes water and turns it into the choicest wine. Jesus' strength is the strength of a shepherd that's laying down its life for the sheep, one that is providing abundance, green pastures, still waters. When Jesus says, I and the Father are one, he's talking about how the truthfulness of the Father is the same truthfulness that he shows forth. It contrasts so starkly with the deception of the leaders. How long will you keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us. Right? I mean, you can imagine them saying it that way. But the truthfulness of Jesus is not just in the things that he says, but in the things that he does, the way that his life shows forth the life of God. We're able to trust him because of this truthfulness. The people who are drawn to him, the people especially in need, they are able to come to him because the truth of his life is trustworthy. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. Yea, even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Jesus says, I and the Father are one, and he's not only revealing the intimacy that exists between him and the Father, but he's revealing the intimacy between God and God's creation as a human one. He's showing us what God wants with everything that God has made. He shows us the ways that we erect barriers and we hold God at arm's length to keep God away so that we might keep living our lives in service to our own selves or in service to the powers of sin and death that hold sway over us. But Jesus says this is what life with God looks like. What does this have to do with peace? I've never been a sheep. I know that comes as a shock to many of you. But I have been shepherded. And there are times in my life where I've been shepherded well. By pastors, by teachers, spiritual directors, parents, grandparents, friends. There's a deep peace that comes with being shepherded well, with being cared for in a way where you know the other person has your best interests at heart, that they're not there for themselves, that they're not there out of a sense of nagging obligation, but they're there because even if there is obligation, they want to be there. They want to be with you. They want to care for you. They want to sit with you. They want to love you. On Mother's Day, we do well to remember our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunts and our sisters and our cousins and our friends who have shepherded us well. And we need that wide circle of motherly figures because I recognize that not everyone has a great relationship with their mom. I recognize that there are some people who have no relationship with their mom. I know that the bonds of family can be broken, strained, estranged. I know that someone who in your youth you considered a safe place in your adulthood has become a place of mistrust, perhaps even harm. But water is thicker than blood. And in baptism, Jesus gives us a bigger family. One with many mothers and many sisters and many daughters. It's not to say, hey, friend, sorry, that ant, he just wants to be all up in my business. I'm not afraid of bugs, but I don't like them. In the Synoptic Gospels, in Mark and Matthew, Jesus' family, his mother and his brothers, they come to fetch him when he's teaching. They want to take him home. Mark's gospel makes it explicitly clear that they think he's out of his mind. And they want to take him home. They want to keep him safe. They want to lock him away for a bit. So someone says, he's in a crowded home, and someone says, Jesus, your mother and your brothers are here. And Jesus says to them, my mother and my brothers and my sisters are those who do the will of God. Now, this isn't to say that we ignore our families, although Jesus does have some really strong words for misordering our love for family, for not considering our love for family inside the greater love of God that God has called us to love our neighbors as ourselves and even to extend love to our enemies. But Jesus relativizes family. He says it's no longer just blood, or no longer just the blood of humans. Instead, it's the blood of God that now unites you, the blood shed on the cross and the waters of baptism. So much of church culture forces us into focusing narrowly on our families. Instead, we should see our families as part of a much wider circle that God has called us to love and care for. When Jesus says those, who can't hate their father and mother and brother and sisters and wives and children, he's not talking about literal hate. He's saying that there's a necessity of putting God first and allowing that family to become, that biological or natural or legal family to become part of a much wider family where you have many mothers and brothers and sisters and children. One of the ways that we celebrate that at Jacob's Well is just by recognizing every adult woman as a mother. Not just a biological mother or a legal mother, but as a mother in this place, a spiritual mother, a mother that we need, a mother that we will not be this church without. Usually we have peonies. This year we don't. Instead, we've got a different kind of gift. You may have noticed that this pothos up here is very healthy. And what I want to do today after church is just offer a cutting from the pothos to every adult woman who would want one. You take it home, you stick it in a clear glass bottle or vase, you put it in a sunny windowsill, and it's going to grow roots, and then you can put it in a pot with soil. And they are so hard to kill. Like, here's the thing. If you take your peony home every year, and not your peony, your petunia home every year. Is it a petunia? Yes, it's a petunia. If you take that home every year and you're like, I'm afraid I'm going to kill it. I don't want to take one. I'm sad. I'm kind of scared. You're not going to kill this thing. You can leave it in a literal bucket of water and it will survive. But I want to invite you to come after service concludes to just come and receive a cutting. Take it home and keep it somewhere where you can see it, to serve as a reminder that you have been nurtured by this church, I hope and pray, but also that part of being nurtured in this church is a call to nurture others, to watch them grow, to give them care, because you are a mother in this place. I want to invite all of us to receive the peace that comes from being shepherded well by Jesus, by turning our life over to his strength and his trustfulness, his truthfulness, his trustworthiness, and the intimate care that he offers us. And while we're inviting the mothers in a specific way to recognize this, I also want to invite our whole church to give that peace to others. Whether they're the people in your home, the people in your neighborhood, the people that you work with, or a stranger who needs the tender touch of God. Let's pray together.